Chambers. Before we begin, I will go over the emergency response plan for this room. In an emergency, everyone must evacuate through the nearest safe exit. Those seated in the gallery take direction from security to evacuate. Council takes direction from the meeting clerk. After evacuating the room, please proceed to a stairwell. Take the stairs to ground level and evacuate the building through the doors marked emergency exit and go to a muster point. Do not take an elevator or walk through the city room. Anyone with limited mobility should identify themselves to security or the meeting clerk during an evacuation. Finally, please speak with security or the meeting clerk if you require first aid. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone to the Urban Planning Committee meeting. Looking forward to a half day ahead of us. As a 7th generation settler on my dad's side and a 3rd generation settler on my mother's side, I always welcome the opportunity to take a moment to reflect on treaty. Edmonton is located at the heart of Treaty 6 territory. From time immemorial, diverse Indigenous nations have stewarded these lands, including the Nehiyawak, Nehewiniwak, Nakota Iska, Dene Selina, and Nitsitsapi. Many more First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples have gathered, traded, and celebrated on this land for generations. This place also forms part of the Métis homeland. The signing of Treaty 6 in 1886-87 created a foundation of good relations, welcoming peoples to this area from around the world. Today, Edmonton carries on this tradition of welcoming peoples from many nations as we continue to live into the spirit and intent of treaty. Do a quick roll call of my committee colleagues. Councillor Tang.
Good morning.
Councillor Cartmel.
Good morning.
Councillor Rutherford will be joining us a bit later. We're also joined in chambers this morning by Councillor Wright.
Good morning.
And online, I see Councillor Knack.
Good morning.
Councillor Salvador.
Good morning.
Councillor Rice.
Good morning.
Councillor Principe.
Good morning.
And Councillor Jans.
Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Tang, could I look to you for the adoption of the agenda?
So moved.
Thank you. Please vote. Oh, I am a yes.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. Councillor Cartmel. We have all the votes.
Please display the vote. And that's carried. Thank you, Councillor Tang, for the minutes.
Yeah, I can move the approval of minutes from May 2nd, 2024 Urban Planning Committee.
Thank you. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, please vote. I'm a yes.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. We have all the votes.
Please display the vote. And that's carried. I'm not aware of any protocol items. Given that we are a bit short on time, I know we have speakers on 7.1 and 7.2, so I will, and 7.3, I will select those. And Councillor Rutherford wanted to select items 7.2 and 7.4. So that is all item, was there another that wished to be selected? Councillor Cartmel?
Yep, 5-1, please.
Thank you. So that is all of our items. We have nothing that we have accomplished yet. Sorry, that sounds terrible, but we do not need to vote on reports or refresh on that. Request to speak. Councillor Tang.
Yes. I move that we hear from, there was apologies, there was an addition to the agenda I forgot to say, but we already approved it. I'd like to move that Urban Planning Committee hear from the following speakers in panels when appropriate for 7.1, naming policy for the City of Edmonton. David Ridley with Edmonton Heritage Council, remote. And 7.3, Neighborhood Area Structure Plan Council authorization. Greg Dooling, University of Alberta Properties Trust in person, and Brian Murray in person.
Thank you. Please vote to hear from those speakers.
We have all the votes.
Please display the vote. That's carried. There are no requests for time specific on the agenda, but I will note that 7.4 is time sensitive, so we may just requisition that to council if we don't get to it this morning. Okay, with that, we'll go to our first item, 5.1. Councillor Cartmel, happy to turn it to you if you had questions of administration.
Yeah, a couple. So this report is with respect to the joint use agreement land update, and I'm not sure who I'm looking at, but it's my understanding that we're talking about how we manage land collectively between the school boards and the city. Is that, do I have that right? That's ultimately what this report would discuss?
Yes, Councillor Cartmell, Ken Snyder, Branch Manager, Planning and Environment Services, is online for questions on joint use agreement.
Yeah, good morning. Yes, that's correct. It's an update on the refresh that the agreement is undergoing. And so, yes, that's the contents of the report is all things to do with land between the city and the boards.
And part of that consideration is when school boards declare land surplus, right?
That is correct. Yes, that process, absolutely.
And in general, as it stands right now, in general terms, if a board declares a site surplus, then the other boards have the opportunity to take that site for their own work. Otherwise, it comes to the city for city purposes, right?
Correct.
So there is a site, a school site, adjacent to the Twilliger Rec Center, which it has been clearly communicated to me by the school board there is no intent of building a school at, and yet we have not yet had the opportunity. We have not yet heard from the school board that they're going to declare that site surplus. Is that true? You can confirm that for me.
So we have folks from real estate who probably would be able to answer that more appropriately.
Councillor Cartmell, Neil from Real Estate here. We actually got a letter late yesterday that the school site in Ledger was declared surplus.
So is that a public letter?
Yeah, like that. It's not, I don't know if it's public, but it does get circulated to the school boards, and then they have an opportunity to claim it. So the letter was just providing notice that the site has been declared surplus, and it's been offered to the other boards.
Is there an approval process when a board declares something surplus at the provincial level? Is there some other approval that has to take place before the site is available to others?
No, I don't believe so.
It's not a ministerial approval or anything that has to come with that?
No, the ministerial approval comes when the original board declares it surplus. So they declare it surplus at the school board level, gets elevated to the provincial level. The Minister of Education approves its surplus, and then it can get circulated.
So there is an approval process at the provincial level. The minister has to approve that being declared surplus before anything else can happen.
Yes, there won't be another one necessarily.
There won't be another what?
Ministerial approval.
Okay, so start again. The board has declared it surplus. Now the minister has to approve that declaration.
No, he's already approved it.
He's already approved it?
Yeah.
All right. So now it's in the hands of the other boards if they want to grab that site.
Correct.
Okay. And, for everybody's awareness, my understanding is that the Francophone board may grab this site, but then is amenable, if I'm saying that correctly, to swapping that site for the Henderson Park Estates, or Henderson Park site. Is that also your understanding?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I think those are all my questions. I'm sorry, I know I've been trying to get this moved forward for 3 years, and I just don't quite trust it. And I just don't want to give up my soapbox here until I know. So, because I have not seen the letter, and so I guess I will trust, but reserve the right to verify at a later date. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cartmell. Councillor Wright?
Just very quickly. How long is that process then that the other school boards have to accept and enter into a contract, I guess?
The school boards have 90 days to claim the site. I suspect it'll be much shorter than that. The Francophone School Board gets priority over any other board that claims the site, so if they put their hand up first, the conversation's over.
Okay, so we should know by the fall, or sometime this summer?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you, that's all I had.
Thank you very much. I see no further questions. Do we require a motion on 5.1 or just to accept the recommendation?
Yes, you can
Okay.
just accept the recommendation.
Councillor Cartmell, if you wanted to move that and speak to it at all, you'd be welcome to.
Sure, I'll move that. Grudgingly.
And please introduce your grudging
Well, I
motion.
came loaded for bear this morning, I will admit, because this has taken a long time. I don't want to be too provocative or rhetorical about this, but I first spoke about getting this site available for some form of housing before the previous election. I remember talking to Mayor Iveson's office about this. We're often characterized in Southwest Edmonton as being somewhat detached from the rest of the city and not interested in city goals. I know a lot of the neighborhoods out there, including the one I live in, do not come anywhere near close to the 16% affordable housing ratios that we have as policy. I have been trying very hard to correct that, and this has been a roadblock for a long time. So if the roadblock is finally gone, good. But this has been ridiculous. This has been absolutely ridiculous, and I'm not quite ready to click my heels in joy yet. I'm still lamenting that it took this long to do something so profoundly simple and so fundamental to our city building goals. So I look forward actually to this report coming, because I would like to, see policy changes that say that when it's clear that one board or another is sitting on land for what can only be described as political purposes and interfering with the process of moving things forward at the city level, that there's some way of taking our land back and doing what we need to do with our land, what is best for the city. And I feel very strongly about that. There's been no reason for delay, no reason at all for this. And so if we're there, great, but something's got to change. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carmel. Please vote.
Yes. Thank you, Councillor Rutherford. We have all the votes.
Please display the vote. That's carried. Thank you. We're on now to our first public report, item 7.1. Go to administration for a quick presentation, and then we'll hear from our speaker. Or any opening comments you may have.
We don't have any opening comments. The report is pretty self-explanatory in terms of how we've reviewed the recommendations and are implementing them. We do have online Corey Sousa, our naming committee liaison, and Mark Pivovar, director of subdivision, to help with any questions afterwards.
Thank you very much. Okay, with that, we'll go to our speaker, David Ridley. Are you here with us this morning?
I am, if you can hear me. Thank you.
Yes. Hi, good morning. The floor is yours for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Yes, I'm David Ridley with the Edmonton Heritage Council. We're excited to see this report come forward and endorse the recommendations. The Edmonton Heritage Council has been in and around the naming and renaming work of the recent past, including as part of the government LRT renaming circle and through funding support for the renaming of Oliver neighborhood to Quintuan. I also wanted to point out that Connections and Exchanges, which is Edmonton's 10-year arts and heritage plan, and aligned with city strategy, strategic priorities and plans. One of the key actions in there is for the Heritage Council to work with city administration to develop heritage policy that guides naming, commemoration, interpretation, and to help incorporate this into city strategies and planning. So I think to date we've been doing that, perhaps not as actively as we might do in the future given this report. I also wanted to note that the Heritage Council does not have an external does not sit as an external representative on the naming committee, such as the Edmonton Historical Board. And I'm not raising this because I think we're necessarily advocating for that. But just noting that this may be something that we will look at in the future to help this work. As I said, we're supportive of the recommendations in the report. It shows an evolving and certainly expanded path for the work of naming, renaming, commemoration, and in some cases removal. The Heritage Council, we believe we can support this work and work with administration and the naming committee, particularly through the outreach, education, and community engagement elements that are recommended in the report. For example, through the Edmonton City as Museum project, and how we use that program. And then our work with the Indigenous community through the FIRE program, and in our work with the Indigenous Relations Office, able to support and be active around Indigenous naming processes. And then we also have policy research capacity within the Edmonton Heritage Council, noting some of the research work that will need to go on and scans of what's going on in other municipalities. Speaking of that, we note that Heritage Calgary has developed a comprehensive naming, renaming, commemoration community handbook. And this has just been out in the last year and a half. So we're watching to see how their approach with the City of Calgary evolves. It's clear that having a strong resource for outreach and education in the community does not preclude the need for staffing support and additional facilitation and education in the broader community, but we'll be keeping an eye on that. And then I would just in ending, should not be overlooked, the essential work that comes in naming policy of working with concerns in the community that related to the erasure of history. And this is something that I think the Edmonton Heritage Council can work with administration, with the naming committee to support, including, for example, staffing needs. It's related to procuring historians to work on some of the surveys that are needed and indicated within the recommendations. So we're looking forward to participating in this work, and thanks to the administration and the naming committee for this report. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Just give a moment if anyone has any questions for our speaker. Well, clearly very clear and self-explanatory comments, Mr. Ridley. Really appreciate you being with us this morning. We'll go and really appreciate the work that Heritage Council continues to do in this space. We will go next to questions of administration. I believe I selected this, but did anybody else have questions? No? I'll maybe just had a few quick ones. On recommendation number 2, I'm just wondering if the review of all names, oh, sorry, Mr. Ridley, could you mute your microphone? Thank you. I think one of the strengths that we've seen in the renaming process is when it's really community driven, it's a grassroots initiative rather than sort of a top-down, we've identified these names as problematic. I'm wondering if recommendation 2, recognizing that resources are a challenge, has there been some consideration of focusing that in, for example, maybe only looking at city-owned facilities rather than sort of every neighborhood, every street?
So, Councillor, that the review of the names list is broader and larger than the existing names that fall within the city. So this is the list that is in reserve that can be taken to be named.
Sorry, I think that the in reserve is actually recommendation 8.
8? Okay, yeah, my apologies.
No, that's okay.
Yeah, so reviewing all of the city names, I think right now we're working with the naming committee in terms of how to approach that. And it is a good suggestion in terms of should we be narrowing that focus, and I'll pass it off to Corey to expand on that a little bit.
Thanks, Travis, and thanks for the question, Councillor Stevenson. That is correct. So there's recommendation 1, which is to bring the open data or the names set up to date to include names from 2004 up until 2024. So once that list is complete, then that is when administration will be working with the naming committee to look at what could be done with recommendation 2. So it could certainly be looking at maybe more significant features such as River Valley Parks, district parks, or as you suggested, city-owned facilities. But to be fair, roads, parks, those are all city-owned facilities or infrastructure. So it'll be a layered approach. We'll have to look at the different assets and the different types of names, and also confront some of the names that are known to be problematic. And that discussion will happen as after the recommendation 1 is completed, which should be done in the 3rd quarter of this year.
Great. Well, thank you for that. Sorry, just note my time is not running, but I have been struggling with another way to phrase this, but I worry that there could be a perception again, for lack of a better word, a bit of a witch hunt in terms of going out and that erasure of community history. And so I would just offer that as a caution or consideration as that work proceeds, but appreciate what you've outlined. I think that sounds like a sensible approach. In terms of recommendation 7, just wanted to confirm that the process of developing an Indigenous naming process is going to, explicitly look at ceremony, at traditional practices. A tension I could see is that may be a bit different than, some of our city's traditional engagement processes, where ceremony is not necessarily a consensus activity or an engagement activity. It's a sacred ceremony. So wondering how that's going to be incorporated in the work ahead.
Thanks for the question. So we've already have been doing that for some of the more recent Indigenous namings and also the renamings, for example, Waquintuin and just recently Okisakau. In fact, the ceremony for that will also happen June 14th when the 101A Avenue becomes permanent in terms of being called Okisakau Way. So far in the last, I would say 4 years, that has been a big part of any naming initiative that has incorporated an Indigenous theme. But as we put together more of a framework on how to, for example, when a community league or community group or organization would like to pursue an Indigenous name, that will certainly be part of more or less a guide, perhaps a document that will be put together by administration that will help facilitate what that looks like, and that will certainly be incorporated in terms of ceremony and following the Indigenous protocol in terms of their approach to naming.
Great, thank you very much for that. Councillor Tang? Oh, yes. Good morning. I'm delighted to just pause our proceedings for a moment to welcome some special guests. We have the grade 6 class from Aurora Academic Charter with their teacher, Ms. Chan. Hello and welcome. Hi. Your ward councillor is Councillor Rutherford. So welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today. Councillor Tang. Oh, Councillor Rutherford.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that. First of all, just excited to see so many of the recommendations that are within scope budget. I just wanted to ask, I know that we had allocated a pretty significant unique budget for the renaming to Waquintuin. Is that how you say it? Did I say it right? Waquintuin. For a lot of systems sort of changes. Is that reflected all in this report? Where is that what is that going to in these recommendations?
So that's a separate item, and it deals with just strictly the renaming of Oliver to Waquintuin in terms of that allocation of
So
internal resources.
I remember when we had that discussion about it, that was a bigger, we need to create the systems. This is the first time we're doing a neighborhood renaming, so we need to create the systems. So is it creating any systems, or is it simply just swapping those names?
In essence, it's not creating, it may be breaking and renewing systems to allow that to happen in the future. But that's not necessarily captured in any of these recommendations. That is more the back of house work that's being done to implement that name specifically.
Okay. No, that's good to know that it's not part of this. Because these recommendations talk, I think will make it easier for things to be renamed. Will they all come with that price tag? Or is it that my understanding was we've done it once, the next one should not cost as much? Or are they, is that an anticipated budget that we need to start allocating?
So there isn't any anticipated budget or package that's being brought forward with renaming. I think in terms of where we are on that journey, we're at that sort of first infant step in terms of what we are looking at in terms of how to rename neighborhoods as they come forth through those community groups. We haven't dedicated any resources to analyzing and figuring out that system in general, but through the naming committee recommendations and the learnings of the renaming of Wauquentuin, or to Wauquentuin, with the naming committee and those processes, there is a general outline on how, if a neighborhood wants to do that, we can provide that to them.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think the challenge is that, I mean, it's such a beautiful story with that renaming, but I'm thinking about if these recommendations are done and then we make it easier for community-led initiatives to be bringing forward renamings, and they're gonna come at a $500,000 price tag per renaming, that's significant when we don't even have the budget to finish all of these recommendations. So I'm just trying to understand what is anticipated in terms of the uptick, like what's the scope and scale of renaming that we're thinking of, and does it need to be a future, maybe not this 4-year budget, but next 4-year budget consideration? Like, I don't want to continually be surprised with these price tags in the committee meeting at the time of those things.
Understood. I think in terms of what the scope and scale is of what we think is going to come forward of the renaming is that we don't know, because they are community-led projects. They will come as they come, but in terms of that future planning work, it is a good consideration that we haven't built into our existing resources and budgets currently for this budget cycle.
Yeah. Okay, so I would, I hope you're hearing me, that I think, if we are going to do these amazing recommendations, it is going to make it easier. It is going to shore up more names that need to be changed. And I think we need to think about the back end of that if, from the understanding, we're going to have these kind of price tags with any kind of neighborhood renaming. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rutherford. Councillor Tang?
Great, thank you very much. And thank you for this report and the speaker who came out today. Maybe just to kind of echo a little bit of what Councillor Rutherford's line there, I think some kind of codification and documenting of those learnings would be really critical, and I recognize it might not be part of this policy per se, but as future renaming processes get underway, I think having that something to reference will be really important. For recommendation 4, I'm just wondering, do you feel the response get at the spirit and intent of that recommendation? Because I feel like the response is really talking about community engagement, but the recommendation is about community engagement, but the response is more about committee recruitment, which is different.
I think in terms of recommendation 4, these are recommendations that were brought forth by the naming committee, and at some point there is responsibility for that agency to undergo that engagement. It's not necessarily solely the responsibility of the administration to do that outreach. The way that response is structured is that we're tackling a portion of it through that recruitment to the board and agency, but not necessarily the larger.
So that they can do that wider engagement better. Okay, I think that's helpful. I think it would have been clear if that was mentioned in the report. 4, I'm wondering, some of the recent applicants, like Wauquentuin, Grandin, Angel Way, but Okesagao Way, and also I'm thinking of some of the southeast parks, like the Mabuhay, Chilean. Wondering if administration had a chance to go back to some of these applicants and communities to talk about their experience, because I feel like it could answer a lot of the questions in recommendations 3 and 5 even.
So that's a great question, Councillor Tang, and there's actually 2 events happening in the next month, one with Okesagao Angel Way, and that's part of the discussion, is to learn not only recently when we permanently named that road, but also the last 10 years, and having a discussion about the positives and also learning about the barriers that we experience to make that happen. And then there is the Mabuhay Park celebration happening this summer, and I'll be attending that event, and I'll be also asking the members that were involved in that initiative about their experience particularly the survey that they conducted and how they got to that name, and their experience so far, and how the whole not only the naming process, but selecting the park and the infrastructure of the neighborhood, how that all came to be. And then
Okay.
we're going to take all those lessons and bring them forward to the naming committee.
Okay, great, thank you. That's helpful. And I want to ask about conversations with MOU partners, in particular Treaty 6. The report says that you have talked to them. Can you talk about what those conversations look like?
So we just had an initial meeting. The outgoing chair, Aaron McDonald, and myself met with Treaty 6 recently, and they have been invited to the June meeting. They were not able to attend the May meeting, but they'll be attending the June meeting. We wanted them to attend with the 2 new naming committee members that will be joining the naming committee. They start their term this month, and their first meeting will be next Tuesday. So the June meeting will be an opportunity for the naming committee to have a really good conversation with Treaty 6, and including administration as well, and then develop a path forward, which will include helping develop the Indigenous naming process, as well as helping to structure what a renaming process would look like, especially when you're including Indigenous leaders, and of course all the other recommendations, and just having them be involved in the whole process.
Those all sound very comprehensive, which is good to hear. I guess my understanding, based on some of the conversations I've had within the community, is that they have been very proactively reaching out to us rather than the other way around. And I think, I'll speak to this in my closing, but I guess I'm just a little bit concerned about kind of a lot of commitments in these recommendations. That's really about engagement, and we should be more proactive rather than waiting for communities to reach out to us. Thank you, that's it.
Thank you, Councillor Tang. Councillor Cartmel?
Thank you. So first of all, this is inappropriate, or out of order, but I just wanted to thank administration for all of their effort on the 5.1 item. I was remiss in not saying that. It's not administration my frustrations are with, and I just wanted to note that they've been really supportive and very helpful. So sorry for missing that earlier. With respect to the costs of the renaming of Wickwentwin, am I saying that right? Yeah, okay. Those are internal costs. We didn't raise taxes to pay for those things. That was essentially an assessment of what it costs when we tally up all of the internal efforts to do that renaming. Have I got that right?
Correct. Yeah, there wasn't. That was captured within existing budgets, and that included not only the soft costs like the back of end house stuff, but also the park signs, the naming signage on rec centers, etc.
Yeah, and I don't want to be too dismissive of that. It's good to tally that up, but those people are working for the city anyway. The sign shop is making signs anyway. There's no special. There's a special effort here, but there's no special effort here.
There is additional costs, like when we rename parks, like the signs are approximately $100,000. That sign wouldn't have been replaced otherwise. If we go further down renaming, if we look at roads, renaming roads is quite expensive because of all the sign blades and then the addresses that need to change and how the effects is knocked on through businesses and residents of the area. So there are costs, and it's just not all costs that are within administration's purview.
Yeah, okay. So, so there is some additional fixed costs, I suppose, some sort of, like you said, signage, swaps, and those kinds of things. Those are new signs that we wouldn't replace otherwise, so that's an additional cost.
Right, for an example, like Calgary Trail, okay. The renaming at the time was about $250,000, and today's it would probably be about $500,000.
Okay, so it's not zero?
Not zero. Okay.
Are we anticipating any? Like, your answers to earlier questions were that we don't have a budget assigned. We don't really know what's coming. Are there others that we sort of see in the queue, other neighborhoods that we've heard might be considering a renaming approach or question or query?
I'll pass that off to Corey if he's heard anything around different neighborhoods.
Yeah.
None so far regarding neighborhoods, but the one active renaming initiative is the renaming of the formerly known Grandin LRT station, but currently known as Government Center. So that process will be starting this summer. So there'll be costs to the LRT system when that name is introduced.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cartmel. Councillor Principe?
Thank you, Chair Stevenson. Most of my questions were answered, but I do have a question about recommendation 6. I think this is a good recommendation. I think it'll make things a little bit more clear. However, I'm just wondering the timeline. Why are we expecting it to take until 2026 for that?
I believe the facility name sale policy, they're bringing that update forward sooner, but the naming policy was just the recent version was just approved in 2021. So we're looking to start the review of it in later this year into 2024 into 2025, and then bring forward the new version, the new naming policy in 2026. So we're incorporating a lot of different elements. For example, renaming, introducing the Indigenous naming process, and dealing with the names reserve list as well. So there are a few elements that are being looked at. So we're going to be incorporating all those elements, but it does fall into the 5-year review of our city policies.
Okay, I see. That makes sense. Thank you. That was my only remaining question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Principe. Councillor Wright?
Thank you very much. I'm just wondering with the cost, renaming is more expensive than a totally new name. I am thinking of the Mabuhay Parks and Kapiwe Park in the ward. Is there more expense with a renaming than there is with a new name?
I think on the renaming side, it's the fact that we're replacing existing pieces of infrastructure that may have not ended their life cycle. So there's that bringing forward of new costs. Definitely in terms of in comparison to new names or new naming a park. Like at the end of the day, if you have a park, the park will need a sign, and whether it's new or old, that sign will have an expense.
Okay. But the cost of engagement is still the same across the board?
I would say the cost of engagement is probably higher on the renaming side.
Okay.
But if we were to take the example of Uquentawin, that wasn't city-led, and it was that community-led piece. So there isn't, unless there's an expectation of administration leading these renaming exercises, we don't foresee that. But there is obviously the back of end expenses that are created through that as well, through the updating of systems, etc.
Okay. And with the naming of the parks, there's the follow-up of the community-led construction project, right? And so that cost would be covered by the communities that requested
It depends on how that park is funded and programmed, if it's city-led or community-led.
Okay. And Corey, I'll see you on June 1st at Mabuhay. But I just also want to, Councillor Tang had talked about the consultation with Treaty 6. What sort of consultation is being done with the Papas Chase First Nation? I mean, a lot of that reserve is in the ward. I mean, it stretches, I think, from 17th Street to about 122nd Street. Is there any formal consultation being done with them?
Not actively, no. They were involved in the ward naming process, but they have not been involved in any of our recent naming initiatives.
So have we reached out to them, or is it their decision not to be involved?
I'm not aware. That's probably a question better answered by the Indigenous Relations Office. I'm not too familiar with the relations that we have with that nation.
Okay. And I don't suppose anybody from Indigenous Relations is on. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much.
Councillor Wright, we can take that away and follow up on that.
Okay. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I'm not seeing any other questions, so I'm happy to move the recommendation that the May 22nd, 2024 Urban Planning Economy Report UPE 02135 be received for information. Was there anyone that wished to speak to this? Councillor Tang?
Yeah, great, thank you. I think when this policy was first brought up, a previous urban planning committee meeting, I think it was, good recommendations and will make things a lot, I think a lot clearer and streamlined. And, I'm glad to see administration and the naming committee working well together in putting this forward. I think, as the world changes, I think this policy and its review will serve us well. I guess I'll just flag, I think this is a bit of a trend I've been seeing with lots of reports coming towards council where we say we have engaged Indigenous community, and I'm thinking specifically of the MOU partners because the city has an MOU with Treaty 6 Confederacy and, the Métis government. And consistently what I'm hearing is that they're the ones reaching out, wanting to kind of contribute, wanting to be engaged. And I will just flag this because this is not the first time I'm seeing that. And just want to remind, I guess, the agreement that we do have. And especially on something like this, I'm glad to see the conversations happening. The presentation is going to happen in June. But when we talk about engagement, it should be two ways that, and yeah, so I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing anyone else to speak. So in closing, just want to thank both our internal team, Mr. Souza, also, of course, our naming committee for the work that they're doing as volunteers. I think that this is an exciting way to include Edmontonians in discussions about our history and help them experience it on a day-to-day in a day-to-day way as well. Speaking of which, a question I am now turning into a statement is just, if it's possible to explore volunteer opportunities to help achieve recommendation number 8. So I think there are many in the community that would be happy to contribute some research time to help us learn more about some of those names on the reserve list, and that could be a way to reduce internal resources and again involve more Edmontonians. I'll certainly be mentioning it to some of the folks that I know that have a real interest in our city's history. Also just wanted to take a moment to reflect on the great value and positive outcome that I've seen in my own ward with the Wequentawin renaming. Really appreciate how quickly it's been adapted, and also just that we are all open to still learning, and getting a word in a new language is always a challenge, but I appreciate that we are all doing that and learning that, and wanted to share a great mnemonic that was shared by Elder Jerry Saddleback. Think of it as we went to win. We went to win. We went to win. So, helpful reminder that has helped me remember this fabulous new name for the neighborhood I'm honored to both represent and live within. So with that, I will call for the vote.
We have all the votes.
Please display the vote. And that's carried. Thank you again to everyone for this report. Moving along to item 7.2. Again, happy to turn to administration for any opening comments or presentation. We don't have any speakers, so after that we'll move to questions of colleagues.
So we do have a presentation if warranted by committee. And yeah, would you like one?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay, great. So good morning. I'm Travis Pollock, the branch manager of Development Services, and with me today to present and answer questions for this item is Jatinder Tawana, acting director of planning coordination, Trevor Illingworth, senior planner of the zoning bylaw team, and Calvin Chan, planner 2 of the zoning bylaw team.
Thank you. And so we're here today in response to a council motion about where entrances for ground floor dwellings should be required for multi-unit residential buildings. Next slide, please. As Edmonton continues to welcome more people into our neighborhoods, we need to consider how a wider variety of development types contribute to the streetscape. Where multi-unit housing is built alongside smaller scales of housing, there are opportunities to improve the ways that these buildings address the street. Adding direct entrance to ground floor dwellings can change how the dwelling functions and how pedestrians perceive and interact with it. It provides the residents of the dwelling with direct access to the street and reduces the presence of blank walls along portions of the building. It can also reduce perceived scale of the building and create visual interest by mimicking the patterns and rhythm of windows and doors that can be found along a typical residential street. Next slide, please. In the small-scale residential zones, RS and RSF, multi-unit and cluster housing developments are currently only required to provide one main entrance where a building faces the street or an internal courtyard. It's optional for ground floor dwellings in these buildings to provide individual entrances. In the medium scale zones, such as the RSM, small to medium scale transition residential zone, and the RM, medium scale residential zone, ground floor entrances for multi-unit housing dwellings are required where the building length facing the street is longer than 30 meters. There's no such requirement in the RL large-scale residential zone or the MU mixed-use zone. As part of the October 2023 next slide, please. As part of the October 2023 public hearing to approve zoning bylaw 20,001, Council passed a motion directing administration to report back on the potential to change the requirement so that ground floor dwellings for cluster housing or multi-unit housing with a building wall of greater than 10 meters in length is required to provide individual entrances when these face a street, park, or shared use path. Next slide, please. Administration assessed existing city policies, regulations, and guidelines, explored how existing residential sites were developed, and discuss the proposed revisions with internal and external stakeholders. The most significant issue identified by administration and stakeholders was around requiring entrances where these dwellings face a park or shared use path. If these entrances were required, there would be a need to provide pedestrian connections to the park or pathway. However, this creates several challenges. Administration has guidelines and standards such as the Urban Parks Management Plan and the Design and Construction Standards that require physical separation between the private development and public parkland. This separation usually comes in the form of fencing around the perimeter of the property. Clearly establishing where public property ends and the private property begins allows both sides to clearly define maintenance responsibilities and prevents encroachment or trespassing onto natural areas, the river valley, or ecological areas. Creating additional pedestrian connections through this fencing would conflict with some of these outcomes. Another consideration is that parks and residential sites tend to develop at different times. Retrofits to the park may be necessary to ensure appropriate connections to these additional entrances, thereby increasing cost to the city. Additionally, the land required for the connection could result in the loss of parkland used for parks programming. Next slide, please. Adding entrances to the ground level could encourage more ground level interaction, whether along a sidewalk or a park or shared use path. In some contexts, this could increase perceptions of safety and improve the connectivity between public and private spaces. However, in other cases, particularly in the case of a park or shared use path, which may not be well lit or well frequented at all hours, having an additional entrance could also reduce perceptions of safety, as this would introduce more uncontrolled points of access to and from the private residential property. This would require specific consideration and associated costs around how to design this interface safely and appropriately, and this can be difficult to regulate in a standard zone that is applied across a range of contexts. Finally, where solid fencing is installed around a property, this can provide the option for privacy for residents and park users alike. Next slide, please. Based on the analysis and the concerns discussed, administration recommends that the ground floor entrances not be required in standard zones where residential buildings face parks and shared use paths, because a broad requirement may create conflicts with other city standards and result in access to areas where it may not be appropriate. Rather, administration recommends that it remains an option where it is achievable. Second, administration recommends that individual ground floor entrances be required only for buildings that face a street and are longer than 12.8 meters. This is a minor revision to what Council originally directed in its motion. The change would not require additional entrances for multi-unit housing that could be constructed on a typical 50-foot or 15.2 meter wide lot or smaller. For example, a single main entrance for these building types would be similar to that of a single detached house with one entrance. It would apply to any building that's longer than that limit in the RS, small scale residential zone, RSF, small scale flex residential zone, RSM, small to medium scale residential zone, and RM, medium scale residential zone. Ground floor dwellings in buildings longer than what could typically be found on a single residential lot would be subject to this requirement, and this would also be similar to regulations found in the previous zoning bylaw 12800. Administration considered but does not recommend including this requirement into the RL, large-scale residential zone, or the MU mixed-use zone. These zones are expected to occur in higher density areas within nodes and corridors where individual entrances along the streetscape may not always be appropriate or compatible with the surrounding built environment, given the need to accommodate a transition space between the public and private realm. In addition, the RL zone in particular is expected to occur in a wide range of contexts, for example, along arterial roads in developing neighborhoods. Therefore, it is recommended that this remains optional for an applicant to incorporate these features where appropriate. Should Urban Planning Committee be supportive of these recommendations, administration will draft amendments to zoning bylaw 20001 as shown in attachment 1 of the report and return to a future public hearing. Next slide, please. This concludes the presentation. We'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. I'll go to Councillor Rutherford. Oh, hello. Delighted to take a moment to welcome some special guests. This is Miss Ryan's class from Aurora School as well. Hello, welcome. Your ward councillor is with us today in Chambers, Councillor Rutherford. Thank you so much for coming. Councillor Rutherford.
Yeah, I think this was selected because I had selected it. So it says in the report on page 3 that the rationale that was used in creating the current zoning bylaw was that it regulates in a manner that supports flexibility of multi-unit housing in a range of contexts and designs. It sounds like if we approve this recommendation today, we're actually limiting flexibility. Am I understanding that correctly?
I think there's a couple ways that we could look at it, Councillor. I think that yes, anytime you impose a new regulation, you do limit flexibility. The zoning bylaw and the process of creating it, though, is not a black and white issue all the time. Yeah. And so this, we took a look at the motion, re-examined the specifics of the motion quite closely and came up with our best recommendation.
But that was your best recommendation based on the motion that council passed? Is that actually what administration on their best expertise rather see the bylaw stay as it is with the flexibility or with this regulation added?
Councillor, I think, as Trevor noticed, there isn't a black and white thing, and we're taking into account that there is a desire to perhaps change that existing regulation through the motion. So we looked at how it was constructed and how we can possibly achieve that direction that was approved through that motion, and came up with a set of recommendations and regulations that balance that flexibility and also that desire to see additional entrances when the building is larger. So I think that's where we see that recommendation, where instead of requiring it for buildings that were greater than essentially 2-lot consolidation, now it's 1 lot it's 2 lots and more, not less.
I mean, I guess just being fully transparent, like when I read the following sentences, it talks about how there's already, because I was like, okay, this makes sense, I think, when I originally, because I'm pretty sure I supported this motion when it came after the zoning bylaw as a subsequent. And I think I was like, oh yeah, design features, like that's a good thing to explore. But then when I read this report more detailed, we already have the ability for an applicant to pick windows, balconies, doors. They have to have some design features. So it can't just be a blank 15-meter wall facing a road, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, so I just worry about the unintended consequences. So I guess my question is, what forms does this, because it says that allows flexibility,
to support, you know, different range of contexts. Is there unintended consequences in terms of even, like, I know one of the things that we as a council have been really championing is more 3-bedroom units, those kind of things. Would this have an unintended consequence on the ability for a developer to be flexible in how they build for more different diversity of units?
I don't think so, Councillor. I do, though, think that anytime you, again, add a regulation, you do open up the possibility that there will be some context that can't meet that regulation or that it's not appropriate for, and then that project may have to pursue variances. So that's often the trade-off. It's typically not saying this, you know, you're closed off to other options of how to design the building, but it may in some cases create that additional process barrier.
Okay. I'm just going to see if I have any other questions. I don't think I have any other questions at this point. I know you did a jurisdictional scan as well, I see, but it's, again, kind of all over the map, is what I gathered from reading the jurisdictional scan. Okay, that's it for now.
Thank you, Councillor Rutherford. Councillor Tang?
Great, thank you. I was wondering, do we have a lot of multi-unit housing that that does face a park or shared use path? Do you know?
Yeah, there are. I mean, some of those were provided in some of the photos were provided in the attachments, so those are those examples.
Okay. And then are there some that have entrances in that direction without fencing blocking it? And I guess also, any feedback from people who might have experienced living in buildings like this or those with gate access? Is there any user experience that you understand that makes it easier or better?
We didn't get an opportunity to seek that feedback, but again, in the attachment, we did provide an example of a situation where there were gates at specific intervals that provided that access. And, you know, when I visited those sites, you know, they were pretty uncontrolled. You know, some gates were open, some gates were closed, so you could just sort of walk into their backyard kind of without any sort of check kind of thing. So, but then as we indicated in the report, it does allow those users, those residents, to directly access that pathway. So there is that sort of balance of it provides access, but it provides uncontrolled access as well.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we've gotten also some feedback from industry. Wondering about your thoughts on some suggestions in relation to like a pilot, for example, before kind of rolling this out. Yeah. Just given, you know, their point around not all properties can feasibly accommodate.
I mean, that's not something that we've considered, Councillor. I think that in general, we take an incremental approach to our zoning bylaw, and I think that in, you know, being open to changing in the future if something isn't working out, I think that to me that's an adequate sort of approximation of a pilot.
So yeah, so to me, I think the intent for incremental is there, whether you call it pilot or a policy change, right?
Councillor, we had these requirements in the previous bylaw as well, so pilot
wouldn't necessarily change anything, yeah.
Necessarily change anything.
So I just want to make sure that you've also had that conversation. Did you?
I mean, we received the letter just a couple days ago, so we haven't had I think an in-depth conversation about that possibility. But again, because of I think that generally we wouldn't recommend going down that path, or we're not intending to pursue it unless otherwise directed.
Okay, thank you for that.
Councillor, just to add, there are other tools available to pursue different types of innovation. I wouldn't recommend baking in a pilot in standard zoning regulation, just in terms of how the implications would fall out of that. So there's opportunity to explore different types of innovation through our different processes and even through direct controls, which I know we don't want to hear a lot about, but that is a possibility.
Yeah, thank you for that. And then something I have flagged that also was part of that letter, you know, just because building code provide the standards for access, I guess I was curious, why can't zoning regulation augment that?
Hi there, Ariza from Legal Services. So so that letter addressed the barrier-free access. So if that's something already incorporated within our Safety Codes Act legislation, it's not something that our zoning bylaw is able to regulate, as it would infringe on that legislation, thereby making our bylaw inoperative. So to avoid that, we would want to stay away from regulating things that are already covered by the Safety Codes Act.
Okay, so we can't just like amplify it.
It can be something we incentivize, but not something we require.
Okay, great, thank you, that's all.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much for the report. Really appreciate the work that's come back. Just wanted to go over sort of how we got here. So for me, this is a really critical regulation in terms of how we meet our city plan goals for promoting a well-connected, attractive, and delightful city through beautiful architecture, animation, and urban design excellence. That's okay. So in my mind, I think that these regulations do help towards that end. And just to clarify again, these had been requirements previously in the bylaw. Though to be fair, I think it was restricted to mature neighborhoods. It was in the MS or one of the overlays. No.
No, it was just in the standard zones.
Oh, okay, great. I didn't realize that. Okay, well then I feel even more confident moving forward with this. Maybe just to clarify as well that, one of the advantages that this can provide is, we talk a lot about neighborhood character in lower density areas that are sort of single detached homes potentially. We talk about that being, street oriented, ground oriented. In having this design requirement, does that sort of help maintain that neighborhood character, the street-oriented nature of the neighborhood, while still adding additional housing opportunities?
Yes, Councillor, I think that as proposed, the regulations would do that.
Great. And again, just clarifying as well that if there are conditions where it's not appropriate, there could be a variance that's granted, and administration continues to monitor variances. Is that correct, to help inform changes to the bylaw if needed?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, perfect. So we'll be able to keep an eye on that if it is creating a pattern of challenges. I wanted to dig in a little bit more to the RL zone. I'm not sure that I'm following the reasoning to not include it, and I'm thinking, particularly, I'm thinking of one specific example, the CX building on 111th Street, which has beautiful ground-oriented interface with quite a high building. It seems to me that if RL was on major roads, for me, the street-oriented design regulations actually create the best interface for ground floor units versus just having, a window. We're looking for zero lot line or, small lot line. There'd be very little separation for ground floor units. So just wanted to dig into that a little bit more, I guess.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the example, Councillor. In that particular case, the ground floor units that were provided were, I think, kind of a row housing style.
Mm-hmm.
The regulation that we're here talking about is when ground floor dwellings are provided, you're required to have direct access. I mean, in that case, I think the nature of the design means that if you're going to provide that type of ground floor dwelling, it's going to, by its very nature, because it's a row house style of unit, I think it's by its very nature going to have ground floor access.
But that could have come in as just a two-story podium that just had a single entrance and just windows instead of doorways, right?
Under a different design, it probably could have.
Yeah, and I think that's my worry, that if we don't have the regulations to require that we could potentially see worse outcomes.
But I don't think this regulation would then require them to be in that row house style to create that same feel or experience. So I think that's our concern, is that we're not requiring in the RL zone, for example, that those buildings always be in a slab, podium tower configuration where the podium is a townhouse units.
But why wouldn't we want that? I think the townhouse podium is one of the best designed building typologies in terms of urban design, interface.
I think that would be a different type of regulation if we were to say that in the RL zone that you are required to, for the podium, for the main ground floor units to be row house units, and then with a tower above. The RL zone is designed to accommodate different contexts, whether suburban or urban, and that may require different designs, and so to impose that across all of our different contexts, there may be challenges to that, and I think if that was the direction given, I think we would require further engagement with industry to understand what the implications are of making that a requirement in other contexts.
Okay, well, thank you. I think that's something for me to follow up with offline, but certainly not today. Happy to go next to Councillor Principe.
Thank you, Chair Stevenson. I have a question. If this, if it goes to council and if it passes this bylaw or the recommendations, the current buildings that would not fall into this bylaw, would they be in violation then of the bylaw? Would they need to reconstruct their buildings? How does that work?
No reconstruction would ever be required. Anytime you introduce a new regulation that's more restrictive than the previous, the older buildings could potentially be non-conforming, but there's always a pathway forward for buildings that are non-conforming with existing rules. It's just that if they were to make changes to their building in the future, they may be discretionary development. That said, the rules that we're now proposing to put in place are very similar in all of these situations to rules that were in place under the old zoning bylaw. So the only instances of those types of buildings that might be in a non-conforming situation, maybe not the only ones, but the most likely ones might be those buildings that have been approved over the past few months, for example, or buildings that are much older that predated even the former zoning bylaws rules.
Okay, yeah, that is a little bit concerning to me, especially considering if it was something that was permitted in just the last few months and then they're non-conforming. That could be a concern. I also have a question about on page 5, it says administration does not recommend the individual entrances for ground floor dwellings facing a park or shared use path. So does this, again, if this bylaw were to pass at City Council, would that include not requiring ground floor dwellings facing a park or shared use path to have individual entrances?
That's correct, Councillor. We don't have that as part of the proposal in the markup that's been provided.
You don't have that in the proposal. So even though you don't recommend it, it wouldn't be in the bylaw?
It's not in the bylaw now, so there'd be no change at this point with respect to entrances for shared use path and parks.
Councillor, just to clarify, the motion was to look at including entrances next to parks and shared use paths. What we're bringing forward today is a recommendation not to include that, which doesn't include any bylaw markups that we would bring forward to public hearing for consideration at council.
Okay, I think I see now. Okay, thank you very much. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Councillor Principe. Councillor Wright?
Thank you very much. The barrier-free access, so does that mean like it has to be a doorway? It can't be like the sliding patio doors there where you have to step over?
Barrier-free access is typically not related to the style of door, I don't think. I think it's typically about whether the entrance is flush to the ground.
Right, but I'm just thinking in a lot of places where there is the sliding doors, it isn't flush necessarily, not always necessarily flush with the ground. So that would be something then that would have to be adapted to make sure that it is flush.
Yes, were barrier-free access to be provided, that yes, it would have to deal with that situation.
Okay. And I think you mentioned that this wouldn't preclude, or not closed off to other design styles, but by putting this bylaw in place, then we are restricting them. They have to have this design style. They could have something else if they wanted to have extra windows on that.
That's
On
correct.
that facing, okay. My other concern was the privacy. So it has to be constructed so that it can be seen from the roadway. But what if the owner then wants to put up some barriers or blinds or something to maintain their privacy from the roadway?
Yeah, nothing would prevent that. The issue would be with the fencing. It can only and this isn't exclusive to this issue, but there's fencing requirements throughout any form of residential development in the zoning bylaw that require a fence to be only approximately 4 feet or so high in the front yard. So,
okay. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the chain link fence that's in one of the photos that you shared. It can be.
Correct.
Okay.
It could be different materials as well.
Okay. And I think you answered my other question in regards to the variances and that it's not something that would have to come back to council to public hearing. It is something that can be done through administration, correct?
That's correct.
And do you anticipate a lot of those? Is that going to create more work for you?
I don't think we anticipate a lot of variances in the situations that we're recommending to make this change. I think that given our assessment and our earlier discussion around the RL zone, we did feel that was a zone in particular that may generate more variety of different situations, which may generate more variances. But given that that's not what we're proposing, I think we're comfortable with the balance between flexibility and prescriptiveness in this case.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Councillor Rutherford?
Yeah, I'm just curious about one more thing that's kind of come up through the discussion. So does this recommendation enhance accessibility?
I don't think it changes it. I think it's the same as it was before.
Can you elaborate on that? Because I think there's a sense that if we have the entryways and then the building code requires barrier-free for entries, it wouldn't require the same thing for some of the other facades.
So, Councillor, the building code requires each of the units be accessible or barrier-free to start with, so that usually takes the place of the hallway entry. And then, so in the case where we have dual entry units, where you have these at-grade entrances, there's other goals and aims that we look to achieve through urban design, through the creation of privacy through different separations, which then kind of contravenes that accessibility-ness, but that unit is still accessible through the building, which is what the building code requires.
Yeah. And I apologize for not looking this up earlier, but you had a very comprehensive, when we did the zoning bylaw renewal, there was a very comprehensive sort of rationale table that went through kind of the why we were changing, the what we were changing. Where would I be able to find that for this? Because I want to go back to like, what was the original rationale for changing it? Because I think the heart and the spirit of the zoning bylaw, if I understood it correctly, was to sort of really ground ourselves in what are we regulating and why, and does it add value? Is that a fair assessment of what the one of the core principles of the zoning bylaw was?
That's correct, Councillor, yep.
And so I know there was hours and hours that went into what ended up coming forward in the current zoning bylaw. What was the because we're kind of, in my mind, reverting a bit back with like kind of a 0.5 back. It was what I would say based on what's recommended before us today. What I'm trying to understand is that a lot of thought and energy and time went into what was put forward in that. And I'm not convinced that this regulation adds that much value. But I'm also curious as to like, I'm intrigued why my colleague is saying it better enhances the city plan. It does all of these things. But I'm just trying to understand, the city plan would have been a guiding compass for the zoning bylaw too. So can somebody tell me where I could find sort of that rationale for this specific regulation removal?
Well, for this specific regulation, I'm not sure that I think you're speaking about we had a version of the markup of the zoning bylaw with a rationale column that contained little notes along the side.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm thinking of. And I don't know what point, subpoint this would have been in the zoning bylaw, so it's hard for me to go back through that whole document, but it just.
I think Calvin's looking for that right now. But what I'll say in general is I think that there's, your observation is well taken. I think that, when you're going through an exercise like renewing the zoning bylaw, it's thousands of regulations. And we took an approach through that work of, like you said, the guiding compass being for simplification, but also, looking to certain areas where, complete flexibility may not be appropriate. And I think that this is an issue we're going to encounter probably again and again over the course of the next few years as we sort of adjust and tweak the zoning bylaw, is that there may be things that when given a second look or a closer look, as in this case, it's possible to look at a situation in more depth and come to a different conclusion than the first time, largely because, again, there's typically not these black and white answers that I see.
Yeah.
So I think that's where we are right now.
Sort of our recollection, and it's not really stated in the rationale documents clearly, but I think when we were considering these entrance regulations, we were considering the idea that if we were wanting to encourage these sort of smaller apartments, these courtyard-style housing developments, that we wanted to provide sort of more flexibility in accommodating how they may be arranged, how those units could be configured. And so that's where we considered we looked at sort of within our neighborhoods, the size of these buildings that they could be in, how far along the streets that they covered, how many entrances do they really need? And so, and again, I agree with my colleagues here that it's not, that there's no sort of general black and white consensus about how many entrances will provide that street experience. And so, we made a judgment call that at the time of zoning bylaw renewal, it was 30 meters.
Okay.
When we revisit down the road, it could be different.
Well, I mean, perfect. I'll just carry on from there. I think that's a really great explanation, and I think what I'm hearing and what's recommended is that we're still providing that design. We're still providing that ease for some of the smaller product, right? So on a 50-foot lot, and if we think about it in terms of, historically 50-foot lots have had a single detached home which has had one door. So to carry that forward where a single 50-foot lot has one door makes a lot of sense. What these new regulations are doing is that after that point, when it's getting beyond that 50-foot lot, then you bring in that door frequency, I guess, that maybe better mimics what was there before. Great. Okay, appreciate that very much. Just wanted to confirm, so, I appreciate the advice around the parks and shared use paths. I do feel that that's an area of urban design that I hope we can continue to sort of iterate as a community. So not suggesting any changes today, but I'm just curious if the city is looking at our design and construction standards, because what I would worry is that if there was a residential development that was keen to do that, keen to have that access, but that our own requirements precluded that from happening, that would be a concern for me. So is there some general work happening on that front?
So it wouldn't be through the design and construction standards, but the Urban Parks Master Plan, or Management Plan, sorry, and that renewal is happening. And so we will look at those park interfaces, as indicated currently in the report, those interfaces and that separation between that private and public space, and that delineation is important so that there isn't a spillover effect, but that can be mitigated through other measures, not just a strict fence. But yeah, we'll be looking at that not only between the entrances, but I think an important piece as well is through parks and commercial development and how that interface looks like as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think there's some missed opportunities for some great patios overlooking beautiful park spaces. So excited to hear that that's being looked at and looking for some more flexibility there. Great. Well, I'm happy to put the motion on the floor that administration prepare amendments. Oh, sorry, I'll put it on the floor and then I have one more question. Prepare amendments to zoning bylaw 20,001 as outlined in attachment 1 of the May 22nd, 2024 Urban Planning and Economy Report UPE 02155 and return to a future City Council public hearing. And so just on that, do we have an expected timeline for those coming back to public hearing?
I think this would be early fall, probably September.
Okay. I mean, it seems fairly robust in terms of what's been prepared. I'm just thinking, back to the point of that Councillor Principe made, just in terms of narrowing the window from us shifting from one regulation, removing it, and bringing it back in. There could be value in having it come forward sooner.
We can look, Councillor, at what's the, given that there are no changes here and that it would be everybody who has we would have wanted to be circulated on this file has been. So we can look at what's the quickest way. But yeah, if we can do it sooner than that, we certainly will.
Appreciate it. Great. I don't have any further questions. Was there anyone who wanted to speak to the motion? Councillor Rutherford?
Yeah, I appreciate the deeper dive into this thing, this specific regulation, not thing. However, I will not be supporting the motion on the floor. I go back to and ground myself in the original intent and spirit of the zoning bylaw, which was to really be conscious about what we're regulating and why, and allow the most flexibility possible. So I'm not understanding how this actually achieves the goals that we want. I understand if there was no design features, but we're still requiring in the zoning bylaw that there be interfaces within our space, from be it balconies or entranceways or whatever the windows, whatever the feature might be. And I really worry about the unintended consequence of putting this back in. I think there was a lot of rationale and thought that went into why it was removed in the first place. And I don't really want to entertain adding more regulation when I don't necessarily personally, and from what I've asked in terms of questions, see any substantive benefit in the arguments that were presented. So I will not be supporting the motion on the floor.
Thank you. Councillor Salvador?
Yeah, thank you so much. I just wanted to briefly click on. I've been listening to the conversation, and just wanted to offer my support for this particular motion. From an urban design perspective, being able to have excellent interface with the street and creating a public realm that is welcoming and conducive to activation, I think is really critical. And I think we heard today that being able to move forward and make this amendment would further enhance opportunities to do that while creating some additional flexibility specifically for the typologies that we're trying to move towards, like cluster housing, that would offer some more diversity in the typologies that we've seen thus far in our city. So yeah, fully supportive of this. I don't see the risk in maintaining the existing regulation. This seems like a really excellent way to go. So would welcome this, but appreciate the conversation today, but would ask for committee support in this. Thank you.
Great. Well, hearing from other members of council who have interest in this, I feel it may be most appropriate to requisition this to council. So I will say the word requisition if one of my colleagues wish to do the same. No? Would you like to say that into the microphone?
Requisition.
Thank you. So that is requisitioned. Thank you. Thanks to our administration, and we will have this conversation at our next council meeting. We have an hour left, and we have 2 items on the floor. We'll go to item 7.3. Again, 7.4, we can requisition to council as well without a recommendation if we don't have time to get to those questions.
I don't think that my questions would be very long for that one, for 7.4, if it's just me that has questions.
Okay, great, thank you. Oh, and Councillor Wright. We will just see how we get by with our time. Okay, so item 7.3, we'll go to administration first if you have any opening comments, and then we'll hear from our 2 speakers.
Great. Thank you. We have a short presentation, and with me today, or continue to be with me today, is Jatinder Tawana, Acting Director, Planning Coordination, and Claire St. Auban, Senior Planner, Planning Coordination. Administration, through this report, is bringing a request for authorization for a new neighborhood area structure plan on behalf of the University of Alberta Properties Trust, or UAPT for short. And I'll be passing it over to Claire for the rest of the presentation. Thanks.
It's okay. Good morning. Located in the redeveloping area, oh, sorry, could I have the next slide? Located in the redeveloping area, the lands are approximately 93 hectares in size and are bounded by 122nd Street to the east, White Mud Creek to the west, the Grandview Heights neighborhood to the north, and the Lansdowne neighborhood to the south. Owned by the University of Alberta and currently used for research purposes, governance has been shifted to the University of Alberta's Property Trust, or we already gave you the short form for that, UAPT, for the purposes of development. Next slide, please. The plan making and development process starts with the city's strategic plans, more specifically, the city plan. Under the city plan, council's authorization is required prior to the preparation of any new statutory plan. That is where we are today. Next, area structure plans and area redevelopment plans are created. This level of plan provides planning direction for groups of neighborhoods. A neighborhood area structure plan, or NASP, which is what is before you today, is a type of area structure plan that provides refined planning for a single neighborhood. Further down the development continuum, if the NASP is adopted, it will then inform rezonings and subdivisions within the neighborhood area. Next slide, please. The NASP is required to align with city standards for complete and connected communities with diverse housing choices and the terms of reference. Broadly speaking, the plan will be required to designate the type and location of land uses, define a design vision, establish a mobility network, identify the location, size, and configuration of schools, parks, open space systems, and natural areas, identify the location and size of neighborhood facilities, and provide general servicing schemes and a staging pattern for development. For comparison's sake, Griesbach is an example of an NASP in the redeveloping area. Next slide, please. The city plan supports a new plan in this area to help achieve the city plan goal of 50% of unit growth realized through infill. It also helps achieve the big city move of a rebuildable city, which targets welcoming 600,000 new residents into the city's redeveloping areas. Next slide, please. Should council provide authorization, the UAPT can prepare the NASP and submit an application. Administration then undertakes the typical process for land use change, which includes technical review, public engagement, and ensuring alignment with policy. Next slide, please. Once administration has completed its analysis of the application, a bylaw and associated report will be scheduled for public hearing with a recommendation. The public will have an opportunity to provide feedback directly to council should they wish to speak at the public hearing, and council will ultimately decide whether the NASP is adopted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go next to our speakers. Hello and welcome. Oh, just for questions. Okay, great. Any questions to our applicants, or to our speakers, I should say? Councillor Rutherford.
Yeah, just knowing the experience I've had with Greaseville, I just want to confirm there would be the same kind of substantive public engagement with neighboring communities as you're developing this?
Absolutely, Councillor. We've already had a year's worth of engagement, 5 open houses, surveys, and we continue that. We have more scheduled for June, and then, of course, the city-led open house process once we make application.
Okay, that was my only question. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councillor Jans, just wanted to touch base with you to see if you had any questions for the applicants.
No, I do not.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for being here. We will go. Maybe actually, you know, I'll just ask the question. I know we've had a few conversations just around the processes that we want to take when we're authorizing new statutory plans, and one of those pieces is an integrated infrastructure management plan, just to understand the implications on city resources and how infrastructure will be financially sustainable in the neighborhood, I guess. Just wondering if that was something that you were intending to do as part of your planning process, what the implications are of that requirement. Yeah, just any thoughts on that would be helpful.
Appreciate that, Councillor. That is a city-led process, so as an applicant, we would certainly provide inputs into that should that be desired. However, we are on a quite aggressive timeline. The city's process would add approximately 3 months, which would likely mean we would not come to this council. And quite frankly, if we were to miss this council, we would probably need to pause for about a year to orient new councillors and go back to the community. So I think from our perspective, appreciate the desire to learn, as long as it wasn't tied to the NASP process, which I know is not required, that would be our desired outcome.
Okay, well that's really helpful and will help inform some of the questions that we have of our administration. Councillor Tang?
Yeah, just peek for me. You mentioned a number of engagement you have done. Wonder if you can share any highlights from those conversations.
Absolutely, Councillor. I appreciate that. You know, we've had lots of excitement around the new neighborhood, and we've had, of course, those who would love to keep it as the farm it is today. However, the university has deemed it no longer essential to their academic purpose and has been now handed over to the trust to redevelop as a private development to create revenues back to the university. So some of the comments or feedback that we've received was really around ensuring that we have a high degree of pedestrian and cycling access throughout the community, particularly connecting into the ravine, which of course is our greatest asset here in the city. Certainly cautioning about traffic connections, not wanting to see car movement into the adjoining neighborhoods, and really wanting to ensure that there's a strategy around transit for mass transit connecting in with the number of people that we intend to move in. Really wanting to respect that there's a transition area between the established communities of Grandview and Lansdowne, so we are been very thoughtful in how we've been considering how do we, I call it mirrored housing, almost kind of match what's across the way to ensure that there's a transition before we get into what would be a very medium density neighborhood. And so there's a lot more nuances to that engagement. Happy to discuss further or follow up with council.
Yeah, just wanted to kind of get a gist of what the community is thinking, and kind of on that piece, you know, some people want to keep it as farmland, but that's really up to the university, and the university is not going to be moving in that direction. It will be something other than agriculture down the road, no matter what, right?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. The university has made the decision. It is now in the hands of the trust, and
I think that's pretty
as
clear.
they say, that ship has sailed.
Yeah, and remind me, this is the target audience for those who might be like, is this students, just families, or just anybody, I guess, market housing?
Yeah, we certainly have undertaken our market assessments. We have quite a wide range of opportunities, and it has influenced the type of housing typology that will come forward through policy. So really a wide range, everything from rental product, mid-rise, missing middle development, to, you know, we do intend to have a small amount of small-scale residential infill, really to appeal to a wide range, whether it be families, new Canadians, student population, or even seniors who might be living nearby who want to downsize but stay in the neighborhood and age in place. So wide range.
And again, also appreciate some of the conversation we've had prior to this, but just want to clarify kind of in this setting as well, that you're really looking to achieve housing affordability, attainable housing, rather than, you know, purpose-built student affordable housing, correct?
Yes, the mandate of the trust is to develop the neighborhood in its highest and best use, and we know that adding supply to the city of Edmonton will achieve housing affordability.
Okay, thank you. Because you did mention students, so I was curious about that linkage, but it's not specific. It's just that they may choose to move in given the housing form.
That's correct.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
Thank you. With that, I don't see any other questions, so thank you again for being with us this morning. We'll go next to administration. I'll ask colleagues to sign up for questions of administration. Councillor Tang?
So I guess maybe it's a policy question, because I was curious about how policy C601 would apply in this case. Would you overlay kind of that 16% target when something like this is being developed, or does it not apply because it's U of A land? I don't know. I'm just wondering how that policy comes into play.
So the affordable housing strategy does set out that 16% target, but it is a target, it's not a requirement, but we'll definitely work with the applicant team on exploring a variety of different housing types to meet a range of different affordability needs.
But that policy specifically applies to non-market or below market, is that right?
Correct. So Councillor, typical, just like in any new neighborhood plan, we would follow the same process. Typically that policy is related to city initiated or subsidized housing. It doesn't direct the land use planning or the neighborhood planning around that specific user type in terms of how we would allocate that through the neighborhood.
Okay. Yeah, given this is, this is a new plan coming forward, I was just kind of curious how, at what stage, right, does a policy like that kind of kick in? Would now sort of be a good time to contemplate those things and kind of incorporate into our planning? Or is it something kind of down the line that it's a bit of a checkpoint? Like, did we achieve this kind of in the overall, development conversation?
It would be that latter in terms of that look back on it. Just in terms of we can't, through typical land use planning process, identify and look to achieve those targets through an NSP.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And then just one more. And I apologize if it was already mentioned in the presentation, but with the district planning, how does this type of large-scale development mean for that district plan? Does it change anything? I'm going to guess not, but I'm wondering if you can just elaborate.
Certainly, the draft district plans right now reflect the current use of the site, which is the institutional and employment. In the future, should the district plans be adopted, we would look at the district policy in our review of the application. Later, the district plan would likely need to be amended just to reflect an update to the map.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tang. I just want to follow up on the question of the IIMP. So understanding that that's a city process, is it true that if we undertook that, it would extend the timelines for the approval of the NASP, or can it happen concurrently as the applicant is working on their work?
It is a concern of ours that it would draw out the review process somewhat unnecessarily. In the past, IAMP's been required for ASPs in those new urban growth areas on the periphery of the city, and not contemplated for redeveloping neighborhoods.
Yeah, and I think that's a bit of this is a unique situation. We don't typically redevelop entire neighborhoods in mature areas. So would the IAMP still be a requirement of any new ASPs?
That is a good question. I think this is something that is to be sorted out with the growth management strategy in later conversations.
Okay, I think for me, IIMPs are really critical pieces of information that we need to manage our growth in a sustainable way. I take the points, though, that this is a bit of a unique circumstance, and that, some of the yeah, it's a different context. It doesn't have the same infrastructure implications as brand new neighborhoods. Okay, so I'll reflect on that and go next to Councillor Jans.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify a little bit on the timelines here. So if this goes through approval today and then goes through approval at council, we then the next step would be actually doing the work and then coming forward for a public hearing. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And when would that public hearing be scheduled?
It would all depend on the review timelines of the application, Councillor Jans. It could be anywhere from 9 months to a year. As we heard from the applicant, there are some other considerations in terms of making it to this council. So, sorry, I couldn't give you a definite answer on that.
Yeah, in terms of prioritizing different applications that admin receives, given we have the info roadmap and certain targets, would something like this move towards the top of the pile or be more middle of the pile?
Oh, no, absolutely. From a central team planning perspective, we have 2 planners already on it. Been meeting with the applicant regularly, been to the open houses. I mean, we're right there and ready.
So would it be fair to say then that this is a priority for administration, that if this goes forward for council, that we would want to see this proceed quickly given the housing emergency and everything else?
Councillor, just in terms of setting priorities of application review, we take a fair and equitable approach, which is a first in, first out approach. But in saying that, as Claire mentioned, the application is resourced appropriately for its size and scale and its complexity that will bring to the review process.
So we don't, given, we have certain targets and goals for the city, certain applicants or applications or areas don't get a higher weighting or greater emphasis than others?
Again, we look as those applications come in terms of what resources will be required to review them. There isn't a weighting system in terms of if you met this ABC checklist, you get to the top of the pile and it bumps some other application down. We are resourced to review the applications as they come in, and we are funded by the application fees. So we resource accordingly in terms of how many staff are required to meet our service timelines that have been established.
Right. What about for scheduling for public hearings? It does seem there's a bit of an art and a science there, but surely it's not just chronological by application.
It isn't, there is an art and a science to it for sure. But really it depends on when those reviews are done. Typically when those reviews are done and administration's done with its report writing, they are scheduled. The applicant does have a right to bring their application forward to public hearing. Administration has a little bit of leeway in that, but we are very careful not to abuse that power.
Okay. Is it, hearing that then, is the applicant on schedule to provide administration everything you need then, assuming this goes through today? And I'm just looking for confirmation that I guess no delays on their end, no delays on our end, and unless there's some massive scope change or something over the next while, this does look something it could conceivably be heard in this council's term.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, excellent. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Jans. I'll take a brief pause and take a moment to welcome our special guest joining us here in Chambers this morning. This is Mr. Chow's class from the Aurora Academic Charter School. Hello and welcome. Your ward councillor is here with us in Chambers today, Councillor Rutherford. Hello, thanks for joining us. Okay, Councillor. Great. No.
All right, I just clicked on to move the recommendation that administration prepare amendments to zoning bylaw. Oh wait, no, sorry. Wrong one. Just kidding, just kidding. That one got requisitioned. I was just gonna move the recommendation. Oh, my e-scribe crashed. Okay, why don't you?
I'm happy to put on the floor that a new statutory plan be prepared for land in the redeveloping area generally bounded by 122nd Street Northwest to the east, White Mud Creek to the west, and Grandview Heights neighborhood to the north, and the Lansdowne neighborhood to the south. Anyone to speak to it, or with any further questions? No? Councillor Jansen, do you have any comments you wish to make before I close?
No, it's very helpful conversation today. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'll just close by saying, very excited to see this planning work coming forward. Really appreciate the work that you've already done to connect with local communities and look forward to that work continuing and what comes before us at a later public hearing. Thank you so much. Please vote.
We have all the votes.
Please display the vote. And that's carried. Wonderful. We are on to item 7.4. If there are any opening comments or presentation from administration, we'd be happy to hear that now.
Good morning, Council. Thank you very much. 1 second here. Sorry, apologies.
No, not at all. Welcome. Thank you.
Good morning, Ms. Chairperson, committee members, councillors. Caitlin Zarbeski. I'm the acting branch manager for Parks and Road Services and City Operations. Today, we're here to discuss the bylaw 20826 to amend the speed zone bylaws 6894. Setting appropriate speed limits is critical to support the safe mobility strategy's purpose of achieving Vision Zero through safe and livable streets in Edmonton. The changes that are outlined in the speed zones bylaw include adjustments related to 30-kilometer-per-hour playground zones and minor adjustments to speed limits in various locations throughout the city. Administration amends this bylaw 1 to 2 times per year as part of an ongoing review of speed limits within the city to reflect updates in road design, expansions, and road network changes. With me today is Shwikar Ibrahim, Director of Traffic Operations, and we're happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rutherford, I think you selected this item?
Yeah. Well, somebody selected on my behalf, so thank you, because I was visiting with the City Hall school kids. I just had a question about 132 Ave, and I see some amendments to this. Can somebody just explain to me what materially changes in terms of speed limits on 132 Avenue? Both between the sections of 127th Street to 113A and also from 97th Street to Fort Road. And then also, why is the section between 113A and 97th Street not in this? Is it already at the speed limit you're wanting? I just need to get an understanding of all of that.
Absolutely. I have Shwikar here. She'll be able to speak to that, Councillor.
Hi, Councillor Rutherford. Apologies for that. Sorry, yes, Councillor Rutherford. So the changes in the bylaw are essentially to bring up to speed the bylaw with the changes that exist currently on site. So these are the speed limits on these portions of road have already been, the signs have been implemented, so the bylaw just keeps up and change. In terms of the second portion
exception for
113 Street, or the portion that you were talking about, Councillor, it's just because they're around the construction that's happening around the area. And so once construction is complete through there, it will get updated in the second round of the bylaw changes.
Okay, I still think I'm confused by that answer, because I thought that there was an exception to 132 Ave in portions, because I know right now it's technically at a speed limit higher in portions than a collector road, but we're converting it to more of a collector road feel through our construction. But like 127th Street to 113A Ave isn't scheduled for construction until further years out. So I'm just trying to understand what is like, I'm not getting a picture of what I'm actually approving here on this road.
So Counselor, the reason for it is this stretch of road is there's changes in terms of the traffic behaviors. So while the 132nd is being converted, the areas around on either side of that roadway need to be adjusted in order to accommodate for that entire new construction that's happening, but also the construction that's coming up. So they do adjustments on it going from 127th Street to 113A Street is the 50 kilometer an hour. 113A Street to 97th Street is
So
40.
it's being adjusted down to 50 kilometers, or it's being down to 40?
No, it's staying the same. So 127th Street to 113A Avenue is 50, which is remaining the same. 113A Street to 97th Street, which is the school zone, is going to 40 kilometers per hour, which has Roseland and Grand Trunk. From 97th Street to Fort Road.
It's already 30. There's signs there that say it's 30 kilometers an hour there.
For sure. I can shoot Carl.
Sorry.
Yes, Council. So what we're changing there is the default speed limit. So the default speed limit, so as part of the 2021, when the speed limit changed, that portion of the roadway was identified as sort of an exception roadway. So the speed limit remained at 50, while all the other roads changed to 40 kilometers per hour. As a result of the reconstruction that was happening on 132 Avenue, and now those portions of the road opening up, the default speed limit changes to 40 kilometers per hour, which is why we had to put it into the speed zones bylaw. You are correct. During school hours, the school zone, the 30 kilometer per hour school zone would remain intact.
But I just am trying to understand. I get that, like, okay, we've done construction between 97th Street and 113A Avenue by the end of this construction cycle. So I understand why the speed limit's going down there. But we haven't started construction all the way to Fort Road. We haven't started construction to 127th Street. Are we reducing those? I'm just not getting a clear sense. So will it, like, if I'm driving, okay, if this is approved, maybe I'll put it this way, and I might have to come back for a second round. If this is approved, I'm starting my journey on 132 Ave on 127th Street. What speeds am I going to Fort Road?
Yes, so on 132 Avenue between 127th Street to 113A Street, that remains at 50 kilometers per
Okay, so
hour
it can go
because
50?
of some changes that were happening there. Between 113A Street to 97th Street, the speed limit has changed so that the default is 40K. So during school hours, it's during the playground hours, I apologize, it's 30 kilometers per hour. Outside of the school playground zone hours, it would be 40 kilometers per hour, which is the default speed limit. And then after 97th Street to Fort Road, it would stay at 50. It would remain unchanged.
Thank you.
Okay. Could I just have leniency for one quick question?
Of course.
Because just we're on committee, and so in that section, but the default in front of school zones will still be 30. So it's 50 unless schools are in session.
For the portion from 97th Street to Fort Road.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cartmell.
Thank you. My question is about Rabbit Hill Road from Riverbend Road to Promontory Point. This is actually the road that leads to the entrance road that goes down to the Twilliger Dog Park. And I've requested previously a few times in the past about reducing the limit on this road to 40 from 50. And it's again it's still 50. Is there a way we can adjust that down to 40? The Park Road is 30. But this stretch of road tends
Yes,
to be
Councillor
like
Cartmell, we can definitely take that away and have a conversation with our safe mobility folks and looking at what the speed limit change there could look like and what changes would be needed to bring that speed limit down. So similar to what we've done on 132 Avenue, typically we don't change the speed limit alone unless there is an accompanying change to the design of the roadway so that we are able to get the behavior to change with it and for people to actually slow down as well. So that's why we need to take it away to look into it and see what changes would need to exist to the road design and then what that would look like and then what would be the best speed limit on the road.
So I've gotten that answer before, each of the times that I've asked this question. The road is one lane each way with fences and 4-foot wide sidewalks on either side. Because coming out of the park, people come up out of the park, up the hill and pin it. And so if we can reduce the limit and then enforce the limit, we can get the noisy vehicles to stop. So I'm not Not sure what to do other than move an amendment to this bylaw right now that limit be changed. I understand what you're saying, but I've had that response before, and then it doesn't make it to the next set of amendments.
Yeah, absolutely, Councillor. We can, the only challenge here would be adding any additional enforcement on this portion of roadway if there was no enforcement on there, just as a result of the moratorium, would cause issues to get the speeding, to get the driver behavior to have people slow down to the 40 kilometers per hour. But so our commitment is to take it away and look into what those changes could be. However, of course, if you wish to make an amendment, that's something that we could look into as well.
The moratorium's on photo radar, not police service enforcement.
That's correct. It would be on automated.
Right. So putting a cop at the top of the hill to get people to slow down would be helpful. I know. I hear you. We lost our traffic department in Southwest Edmonton.
Councillor Cartmel, to add to that, one thing that we can do is we could look at doing a speed limit change of the signage in that area. And then upon review, we could look to do a change to the bylaw as well. So there's some things that we could do in the short term upon a review as well. So it doesn't take another review of the bylaw to implement any of those changes.
Okay, I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Councillor Cartmel. Thank you very much. I just am looking, I had one quick question. You know what, I'll go to Councillor Wright and I'll come back.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. So that moratorium on the automated enforcement, it doesn't, we're still not allowed when we designate a new playground zone for it to automatically become enforceable?
I'll get Christy Pelletier, Director of Safe Mobility, to speak to that, Councillor.
Thank you.
From an enforcement perspective, so 40-kilometer-an-hour roads are not enforceable by automated enforcement, but we certainly can work with our partners at Edmonton Police Service to let them know.
I'm wondering about the playground zones that are supposed to be 30.
So we are able to enforce through automated enforcement at our playground zones. That's correct.
Even if they are newly designated as playground zones?
We do have to go through the process of having those approved through the provincial body, but we do that, we do that ad hoc throughout the year as needed. So we can work together with them to have that approved.
Are any of these newly designated playground zones or that have been designated playground zones in the past, 4 years, 5 years since the moratorium was put in place? Have any of these new ones been requested for automated enforcement zones?
In relation to the moratorium, any new site is not a possibility right now. So I guess the nuance.
Past 5 years, nothing new has come out, even playground zones.
Correct.
Okay,
that's the one nuance I will say is we did have a change with Anthony Henday sites in the fall of last year.
Yeah, I know they canceled the fishing holes. Okay.
But that did give us the ability to look at some playground zone sites, and we did have some challenges with getting those approved. So that might be the area that you're thinking of.
Okay, but so no new playground zones approved. But we can reallocate some of the resources from the Henday sites to other areas of the city, correct?
That was the idea, but they still need to go through the process of having approval through the province. And it wasn't as straightforward as I think what the province thought at the time, but we do continue to work with them around how to reallocate those assets to other areas in the city based on their approval. So no, it wasn't a direct translation into new playground sites, and it is accurate. And I will check with the team if there's any nuance to this, I'll let you know, but it is fair to say that no new playground zone sites have been added since the moratorium has been put in place.
But those resources from the Henday could be reallocated to the existing playground sites, right?
Correct.
And has any of that been done?
Generally, I'll say yes. Again, there's a deployment approach that we need to look at to make sure the equipment matches what's approved to use in that site. But generally, yes.
Okay, great. And I'm just taking a look at the Safe Streets map. So just because it's a park doesn't necessarily mean it's a playground, even though kids could be playing in that park, correct? I'm looking at the Safe Street map and I'm looking at the playground zones, and it's not necessarily around every park or green space. So how do we determine whether
Hi,
it's
Councillor
a
Wright. Yes.
playground as opposed to a
Sorry.
park?
Okay, hi, Councillor Wright. Sorry, I apologize. I couldn't catch if there was something at the end of that sentence. So you're correct. The playground zones were specifically either play spaces, green spaces that had play equipment at them, that we were with the playground zone, the 30-kilometer playground zone would be installed, or playground zones attached to schools as well. So not an open green field that doesn't have any play equipment wouldn't necessarily have a speed limit attached to it.
Okay, because
The
I'm noticing
30-kilometer playground speed
we
limit
talked
attached to it.
about the Kapiwe Park and the Mabuhay Park, and Kapiwe is designated as a playground, but not the Mabuhay Park, so that's unfortunate. I don't think I have any other specific questions. Nope, that's it. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. My question was just around, in the report, it notes 127th Street Southwest, but then between 106th Street and 109th Avenue Northwest, but it looks like in the bylaw that has been correctly identified as being between 73rd Ave Southwest and 41st Avenue Southwest, so I think we're all good on that. No further questions for me. Councillor Knack?
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. Just the one question around Stone. I figure since we have a chance to chat about Stony Plain Road, close to 231st Street, I know I've sent over some videos recently about sort of 40 to 50 cars in the shoulder of a 100-kilometer-an-hour highway, and I know Parkland County's doing some work, as we've discussed. We had thought to maybe chat about, can we, instead of waiting until the fall when their work maybe completes, is there something we might want to do differently for that stretch of road?
Yes, Councillor Knack, we are looking at, we're just working with the province as well as our colleagues and looking into reducing that speed limit within the next couple of weeks.
Oh, wonderful news. That brings me great joy. Well, then I have no further questions. You've made my day. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Knack. Councillor Salvador?
Yeah, thank you so much. So I guess I wanted to ask a question about if we have a specific roadway that is an arterial, but hearing lots of concerns about excessive speed, severe crashes, what is the best mechanism, I guess, to have a conversation about strategic reductions from 50K in those types of locations?
So we do have an intake process, Councillor Salvador, for the roads with, if there are any concerns around speeding. The only issue is reducing the speed limit alone is often not as effective in actually changing the behavior to get people to slow down on those portions of the roadway. So typically we look at any of those locations within the context if there's any renewal that's happening or if there's any programming that's available through any of the safe mobility projects as it makes sense. Usually the focus of those are not on the arterial roadways just because of the nature of the design of the roadway. But typically the changes are, we would do an assessment there, we would look at the speed limits, we would look at the design of the roadway, the length of the width of the road, how many lanes and such, the land use, and then depending on that, we would either keep the speed limit as is or recommend any changes such as curb extensions on roadways or any other types of examples that we could do, or if there's major reconstruction, then we would look at reducing the speed that way.
Okay. And yeah, I think that's your earlier point around simply reducing the speed without making design changes is really well taken. And I mean, I can be explicit. The example that I'm thinking of is 112th Avenue in Ward Métis, where I think it was, back in maybe 2011, there was contemplation of a redesign and a bit of a road diet there to enhance safety. And I guess it's one of those instances where, in the absence of true design interventions, we've kind of missed that opportunity. So what is the best mechanism in the meantime, while we wait, a really long time for renewal to eventually come back around? And maybe that leads to another question. Do we ever, I'm I'm thinking of, I guess, opportunities to use curbside management as traffic calming. um, because right now, up and down 112, there are restricted parking times. During rush hour, you're not allowed to be parked there. During other times, you can be. And I'm just thinking of scenarios where, what if people were allowed to park there all the time? And that, in and of itself, created some narrowing, which could enhance. Some traffic calming in the area. So how, does that get considered as well? I can also take this offline and we can talk more in depth, but just wondering how that is factored in.
Yeah, Councillor, and I think when we're looking at the case around speeding, there's a number of different things that we need to look at. There's excessive speeding where people are already exceeding the speed limit by a significant amount of, kilometers per hour, and that portion, like that type of behavior, the way that you would address it is very different from if there was a lot of people that were speeding, 5 or 10 kilometers over the speed limit. The approach itself would be different. As you suggested, though, there are some additional ideas that we could look into, such as parking. The only piece that we need to make sure of is their demand. Because if we allow parking but the vehicles aren't parking there, that doesn't really create the same level of that road narrowing on the roadway in order for people to change their behavior. So we can definitely discuss offline if there's any specific locations that you'd like us to take away. But typically when we're looking at the speed and the differences in the speeding behavior, we want to understand how, for lack of a better word, egregious the speeding is, and then what are the best ways to actually influence that behavior. So in some examples, on some collector roadways, we've used the driver feedback signs. So these are the signs that you put on the side of the roadway that display your speed back to you. That's usually used for, really good instantaneous feedback to the drivers around, the speed that they're traveling at. In some of the other cases, it's the redesign. It could be something as simple as just having the curb extensions on there. It could be examples such as, the Towards 40 program, which is explicitly for collector roadways, but it's looking at reallocating some of the curbside space to active transportation, for instance, as an example. So there are some other solutions that are available. It's really just context dependent on what the issue is and what's the best way for us to be successful in changing the behaviors there so that we're increasing safety by getting people to reduce their speeds.
Great, I'll have one more round. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Salvador. Councillor Cartmel?
Thank you. I have an amendment to offer.
Please feel free to put that on the floor.
I'll put the motion.
Oh, well.
I can move the recommendation.
Sure. How would clerks recommend that we proceed?
You can do either. You can put the motion on the floor, but then you should deal with the motion on the floor, or you can put forward a motion as long as it doesn't defeat the motion on the floor later.
Okay, and just to clarify, if Councillor Cartmel were to put an amendment on the floor and we only pass that, would the other recommendations still be approved?
You could still pass the other one because they don't defeat each other.
Okay. Go ahead and put your amendment on the floor. Sorry. No, it's we're all learning.
I will move that the aforementioned bylaw, just one moment. I will move that administration prescribe a temporary maximum speed of 40 kilometers an hour on Rabbit Hill Road from Riverbend Road to Promontory Point and prepare amendments to the speed zones bylaw 6894 to permanently prescribe this as the maximum speed limit. And I think that's the limit of my motion.
Excellent, thank you. Any comments to introduce?
No, I think I said what I need to say earlier.
Okay, great. Well, maybe I'll just see if there are any specific questions on this motion. Councillor Wright?
I'll just ask one. Is 40 low enough? Do we want to go 30?
That gets confusing. In my view, it's 30K is the playground school zone speed, 40 is the slower residential speed, 50 is the collector, 60 is the arterial. I think this is consistent with that.
I was just wondering because coming into the park, would it be? Yeah.
Well, this road leads to a couple of neighborhood entrances and then to the park, so.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you though.
Great, thank you. Councillor Salvador, did you have questions on this motion or just other
No,
questions?
not on the motion.
Okay, great. Well, not seeing anyone else to speak to this motion or ask questions on this motion, did you wish to close, Councillor Carmel?
No, thanks.
Okay, please vote. We have all the votes? And that is carried. Great, so we'll go back to our main, the main report. And Councillor Wright, you had questions?
Yes, I did. Well, first of all, I do want to say thank you to the Safe Mobility team. Everything that's been done with Vision Zero, I think that's internationally recognized as well. But I do just have one question with the Safe Street Maps again, is when will they be updated with these changes? Because I'm noticing the playground zone around STEM Collegiate on 47th Street is not showing on the Safe Street Maps.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll be sure to take that away from my team. We do look at this a couple times a year, and certainly if you're seeing some inaccuracies there, we'll action this in a timely fashion. Thank you.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know. Thank you. That's it now.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rutherford.
Yeah, I'm just on the floor to put the recommendation that committee recommend to council that this bylaw be given the appropriate readings.
Excellent, thank you. Do you wish to introduce it in any way? No. Okay, I just had one last quick question, just around, we had a conversation recently at public hearing around some of the traffic challenges on 120th and 121st Street, north of 111th Avenue in the industrial area. Just wanted to confirm, again, my understanding is that that road is already 40 kilometers an hour, and that some additional signage was going to be added, but just wanted to confirm that my understanding is correct.
We can take that away, Councillor Stevenson, and follow up with whether the signage was installed or not, if that works for you. I just need to confirm.
That's great. And I think I understood from a previous question that you are able to put up temporary 40 kilometer an hour. So if it turned out that those roads weren't actually designated, that we had to make a bylaw amendment, that the 40 kilometer an hour signs can still go up in the interim, and then we can do a subsequent amendment.
That's correct, yeah, which is one of the reasons why we bring the bylaw sort of twice a year. The changes, we have 6 months from when the signage are installed or the speed limit change has been made for us to correct it through the bylaw.
Okay, perfect. That's very helpful, and really appreciate this ongoing evergreening of our speed limits in our city. Councillor Salvador, for questions?
Yeah, thanks so much. So just wanted to ask one more, and context for this one is a K-9 school next to a major arterial, in this case 118th Avenue, and I guess wondering in a context like this, where the school is directly adjacent to that arterial, hearing a lot of concerns from parents, about the lack of a playground zone. How would we navigate this type of context when it comes to safe mobility and the introduction of a playground zone? If it sounds like that's not an option, and we run into the same types of physical design challenges that we talked about before, given the speed with which the road was originally designed for. Thoughts there?
Yeah, I can maybe jump in, and then Christy, if you want to add in there, just from my knowledge around the playground zone program before. But Councillor, typically when we have the school zones on, or when we have schools that are on arterial roadways, there's no break in the fencing, so the fencing is closed completely around the green area, and then typically the crossings are upgraded to either a signal or a half signal on those particular pieces. So in order not to create that sort of false sense of security of reducing the speed limit, and the drivers aren't actually slowing down as a result, again, because the roadways aren't supporting that lower speed limit, we typically don't go to the playground zone. So part of the playground zone review was to look at what are some of the changes to limit the speed limits to around the areas where we expect to see some of that, potentially the students and the parents using accessing the schools. So there are some other measures that we could look at for arterial roadways, as well as some other programs. And I'll just ask maybe Christy to jump in to talk a little bit more about them.
Sure. I agree with everything you've said, Shwikar. And just to add, we do have a Safe Routes to School program and other school programs where we can work together to identify, the challenges that are being experienced, especially during those peak drop-off and pickup times of the day, and to work through some traffic calming projects in collaboration with the school itself. And that's a shared funding approach with Edmonton Public and the Edmonton Catholic School Board. So that's one of the programs that certainly we can look at that might help bring some improvements to the area in addition to those crossing improvements as well, the Safe Crossings program.
Great, thank you so much for that. And I definitely think there'd be interest, so I can follow up with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Salvador. I'm not seeing any further questions. Did anybody wish to speak to this motion? Giving it a few moments. Yeah. Oh, okay. Great. Councillor Rutherford to close.
I will just quickly. No, I'm not going to take off 5 minutes. But I do want to say, this is the kind of stuff, this is the bread and butter of municipal government. It's the stuff that is, very much the day-to-day, but it has huge impacts on how people intersect. I think one of the biggest calls I still get to my office, and I know I've heard this from a lot of colleagues, is around traffic safety concerns. And we just had our EPS present their report where we see traffic fatalities have actually increased in 2023. And so this is the kind of stuff that is really important in making sure that all Edmontonians feel safe and that we create appropriate speeds for folks to be able to get around our city, but in a safe way. So I just wanted to highlight that because I think, it as non-assuming as this sounds, this is the stuff that we're here to do on a day-to-day basis. And it's kind of nice to just be able to talk about speed limits and traffic safety and not all the other stuff that we tend to have to grapple with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rutherford. And you reminded me that if I had remembered to click in, I would have spoken about the potential for a dedicated traffic enforcement team of city peace officers, which may be in front of us. But unfortunately, I missed the opportunity. So with that, I will call for the vote.
We have all the votes.
Please display the vote. And that's carried. Wonderful. I see some guests coming in, and I will just take a moment to welcome them before we on to our very last item, which is a motion pending, which is my own. But before we do that, I'd like to welcome the grade 6 class from Aurora Charter School. Hello and welcome. I think we have 2 classes with us right now. Your ward counselor is Councillor Rutherford, who's here with us in chambers. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Oh, our pleasure, our pleasure. Enjoy your time at City Hall. So, we've got 10 minutes left. I would like to move that administration provide a memo on the work underway on the downtown vision refresh, including the establishment of an education and innovation district and opportunities for partnerships. As a brief introduction, one of the findings that stood out to me from a recent retail frontage study that was done in the downtown was the fact that Edmonton's geographic downtown is one of the largest. I think it's almost twice the size geographically as Calgary's. It is a very significant geography. And I think when we look at placemaking, one of the challenges with downtown being such a large area is that that placemaking can become a bit diffuse. It's in such a significant area. One idea that has been percolating for some time has been the idea of sort of further segmenting, identifying certain areas of the downtown for more focused placemaking initiatives. One of those exciting opportunities is with our education district, so recognizing that Norquest and McEwen in one area of the downtown, and also an innovation district where we have Explore Edmonton, Amy, and the U of A as well. Again, this work is ongoing. The Downtown Vision Refresh is an exciting initiative that is pulling some of these threads together. The reason that I felt a memo at this time would be beneficial is that this idea also came up in a recent conversation with the Premier at a real estate forum at MacEwan University. So I believe that there's interest and growing interest in this concept and idea. So I think having some information in front of us will allow us to take advantage of opportunities for partnerships and again further this exciting work in downtown placemaking. So I'll leave it there and happy to go to questions. Councillor Rutherford.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess to the mover, just do you know, and I can ask administration if you don't, but what's the timeline of this downtown vision refresh? What is the timeline on that?
It's work that's just beginning. We are just in the process of scoping engagement and the project charter. The intent is for the team to begin this work after the work on district planning that would continue through the course of 2024.
So we would.
So about a year.
So we were expecting that to come back in 2025?
Yes. Potentially earlier. It's also aligned with the work that we're doing around the community revitalization. It was a motion for subsequent to the downtown reports, along with shared and open streets. There was an action plan associated with that work or that report. So the intent is to sort of consolidate these actions.
And is the downtown boundary the same as the CRL, or is it different? It's broader, like it includes Chinatown.
It's
Does it include
smaller,
parts of,
but
smaller.
also odd because it also encroaches. It also not encroaches. It also extends a little bit into the quarters.
It extends a bit into the quarters, but does not include Chinatown.
No. Tiny bit. Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. Yeah.
And what's the reason for that? I guess I just like I'm very excited for this work. I think it's well needed, and the reason I'm asking these questions is because I think it actually should warrant a report as opposed to a memo, given the importance that we've put on downtown. And I think given that there are some live conversations, I know, during the election, the Calgary got a new hockey arena, and we've talked about parity and what does that look like for our downtown. And I feel like maybe this is a point where we have to have that public conversation with Edmontonians about what that looks like. So I actually think it's beyond this, and I guess to the mover, why a memo and not a report, so we can sort of have some of those more public conversations about how this work proceeds and how we make sure that we provide that feedback to admin on all the diverse priorities and give the public a chance to speak about what they want to see in this vision.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I'm certainly open to a report if administration feels that there's valuable input that council could provide to them as they're scoping out the project at this time. My assumption was that a memo may be a bit more expedient just in terms of timelines. But, again, I think great question. Very open to that if administration sees value. And
I see the memo being helpful for right now, providing that clarity to council on the project and the work will be undertaken. How the work comes together will absolutely have to be a report to council. And we'll have to look at the staging and phasing of when we have those check-ins with committee through the work.
Is there any way to accelerate this project? Because I'm worried that we have several competing interests in the downtown, and I don't want to miss opportunities for funding, but I also want to make sure that there's opportunity for comprehensive discussion with all stakeholders in the downtown.
Absolutely, and that's what the team is scoping out right now in terms of the project scope. What are the resources needed to complete the work? Can certainly take that back in terms of a go fast approach, I'll call it.
Yeah.
The intent is to do this work within the year. We recognize the importance of downtown. Actions are needed. So this isn't necessarily like a robust update to the downtown plan. It's really looking at a refresh to the vision, and what are those targeted actions we could take collectively, whether it be city or industry, to realize that vision.
Okay, I'll leave it there for now. Think about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rutherford. Councillor Tang?
Yeah, just on that very quickly, I think I would support keeping it as a memo, actually. I think there's a lot more different pieces that needs to come together, and I don't think there's going to be a shortage of conversations in the community. So that's kind of where I'm at. Just in case, like, anyone thinking the friendly amendment, I wouldn't want that to be friendly. A few years ago, under Mayor Iveson, he had talked about the innovation corridor. So I imagine a lot of that work has already been done, especially connecting in with a lot of the post-secondary institutions.
Certainly the city plan identifies an innovation corridor.
That's right.
There's nuances around where that physically looks like in our downtown, with Edmonton Unlimited as an example along Jasper Avenue. But yeah, there's certainly work and feedback from stakeholders to draw from.
Yeah, and so I guess my point is, like, there's been some work kind of that can get started. This is more just honing in on the downtown piece. And then, just I guess in reference to that comment you mentioned from the premier, I mean, that intrigued me as well. I think I was wondering, is this like a city thing, designating a district? Is it a provincial thing? And then what would it do? What difference does it make to the mover?
Yeah, no, great questions. And I think that that's one of the motivations for the memo is to understand. Oh, Councillor Rice, could you mute your microphone, please? Thank you. Yeah, the purpose of the memo would help us get an understanding of what has happened, what the options are. For example, I don't know that it would, I don't think we need to, I don't think it's by bylaw that we have different districts. It could be something like flagpoles or, I don't know the correct term, but the lampposts with branding. It could be when we're doing infrastructure upgrades that, for example, along Jasper Ave, maybe there are elements of that streetscape that reflect innovation, reflect the buildings around it. So there's a wide range of what that could look like. And again, knowing that the conversation is out there with many different partners, just wanting to get a solid understanding where we're at so we can contribute to that conversation and help contribute to that conversation and make sure that the city is a full partner in it.
Yeah, I mean, I can appreciate the strategic angle on this, and I guess just given the post-secondary institution element, I see that very squarely also on the provincial side, and we can be a partner, and think whatever that memo comes back, I think I would like to just see a bit of reference to various roles and groups that need to be involved. That's all. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions on the board. Anyone to speak? No, I have nothing further to add either, so I will call the vote.
We have all the votes.
Please display the vote. And that's carried. Do we have any notices of motions or motions without customary notice? We are adjourned at exactly 12 o'clock. Thank you all so much for a very efficient morning. Have a good day.